All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to season 4 of Black.Queer.Alive. I'm Mimi Tempestt. I'm here with Tanya Calvin. How are you, Tanya?
I'm well. I'm chilling in my living room trying to unwind.
I feel you. I feel you. I really loved your response to the call. Uh, I don't encounter too many Afro Latinx, specifically Black and Mexican folks. I too am Black and Mexican, so
Oh, wow.
so I was very I was intrigued to listen to your your experience and just
Yeah,
learn more about you and your work and stuff like that.
super cool. I actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I didn't know any other Black Mexican people for my whole life until I was 20 something, besides my sister.
Mhm.
Um, And then I met this poet, Ariana Brown, who's Black Mexican American at my college. She performed there. And I broke down in tears in front of her and was like, this is so cool.
Yeah, I think it's just I'm from the West Coast, so I can't remember where you're from. I'm
I'm
sorry.
from Chicago.
Yeah, right. And I just feel like it depends like where you're at in the country, like really influences how many other Afro Latinx people that you run into, more
Mhm.
specifically Black and Latinx. Because a lot of people, when they think Afro Latinx, and this, I might be wrong about this, but they think like Dominican or like Puerto Rican.
Mhm.
Like that intersection of being Black and Mexican is something that I don't get to, um, I don't get to interact with too many folks like that. So.
Yeah. A lot of my work, not so much of my earlier poetry and um, performance work focused around Black and Mexican identity. I have a zine that's literally all about that. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Let's dive in. So tell me, what's your age? What are you passionate about? Or what motivates you?
So I'm 23. I'm actually about to turn 24 next month.
Oh, you're an
Um,
Aquarius.
I am an Aquarius,
Yeah,
yes.
nice.
I have half my chart is in Aquarius. It's like a whole. It's
Same, actually. You have a lot
really that's so interesting.
of placements in Aqua, so that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm turning 24, and I'm passionate about, well, by day I'm an archivist. So for people who don't really know what archivists do, basically in museums and libraries, there's really old stuff that needs to be taken care of in a certain way, and so I focus on taking care of that stuff. But right now, I'm a community engagement archivist, so I'm less hands-on with the actual documents and books and things, and more so just talking to folks about archiving. Um, and then, so that definitely motivates me because that's my paying job. Um, and then, other than that, I'm a poet. I'm a performance artist. Like I said, I make zines. And that I feel like, I mean, I do really care about archives, but I feel like my art is always what really gets me going. That's what I get the most excited about every day. It's when I get to sit down and read a little bit, do a little bit of research, or work on a project, or share a post on my Patreon or something like that.
Can you tell me more about like how you got into uh is it archivism? I want to say it the right way. Archivism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got into archives initially. Well, I've always wanted to work in a library or a bookstore or something. I remember when I turned 16 and I was looking for my first job, I was applying to a lot of bookstores. And then I got to college and I applied for a student assistant position in the archives at the library at my college.
Mm.
And I didn't get it my first year, but I did get the position my sophomore year when I reapplied. And there There's a lot of on-campus jobs, especially in the library, where you can work the circulation desk, and there's a lot of ability to like work on homework and other things while you're working there. But the archives job is really hands-on, and so you can't really do other work. Like they give you a project, and then you either work on that project, or you do retrievals, or you help set up the classroom for a class that's visiting, or whatever it is that they need help with. And I did that for 3 years, and that led me into an internship I did in 2019, the summer of 2019, before my senior year of college, at the Chicago History Museum. And so I was an intern there. I worked on a collection of Reverend Joseph H. Jackson, who was a very complex Black man. He was a civil rights activist, but he was very conservative in his activism. And so he actually got into a lot of fights with Martin Luther King Jr. And I saw some interesting, like I saw this one really shady essay that Jackson had written that he was basically like coming for MLK, but it was like he was doing it like politely because MLK had like just been shot, and then he like wrote this essay, and he was just like, well, now we need to like move on from MLK's guidance and like just do this instead.
Like, that's cool. Like, I want to know the foes of MLK versus like.
Yeah, no, it was actually like a whole thing, and it was like it got so bad to the point where like MLK literally just at a certain point, they were all part of the National Baptist Convention. And then at one of the conventions, MLK didn't go because he didn't want to like cause issues, but MLK supporters basically caused like an insurrection in the convention. And then there was a brawl and like somebody died. And then like somebody fell off, like one of the reverends fell off the stage and like hit his head and then died in the hospital after. And then after that, MLK just like split a faction away from the National Baptist Convention and started the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which still exists and is still separate from the National Baptist Convention. But it's like that's the kind of stuff that you would only know about if you were looking through Joseph H. Jackson's like diaries and like books and things like that.
So cool.
Yeah. 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 And it's like so what a lot of archives, I guess I should be more specific, because a lot when I say like I'm an archivist, I specifically focus on Black archives. A lot of archives are very colonial, and like one of the main issues with archives is the fact that a lot of the materials, like if you think about like all the artifacts that are in like the British Museum, like they're all stolen, obviously. And so there's like all these discussions around who owns the things that are in archives and who should be able to access them and who should catalog them, because cataloging really matters. It's just like a whole thing. But I focus on Black archives because I feel like that's like what I mean, I was a Black studies major in college. And so that's what I know. And that's like what I can accurately represent. If I'm creating like a catalog for a collection of Black books, like I sort of know the history of Black literature for the most part, and I can apply that knowledge. Whereas somebody who focuses on like European, Shakespearean, whatever, isn't going to have the same view on cataloging Black books, because like there's like tags that you have to use and like subject headings, and it's like it gets so complex just when somebody who doesn't know anything about the topic doesn't do it. So when I got into archives, at first I was doing a little bit of work in Indigenous book collecting with the archives, with my boss at the archives, but then I sort of mentioned that I didn't want to do too much of that because I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing there, and I don't want to like cause any issues in the future with somebody having an issue with how I catalog something or something, because I don't know what I'm talking about. So they just had me work on the Black Panther newspapers, which was actually really dope and super fun. And they have like almost a full run of the papers. And so I got to just like flip through, like literally I spent hours and hours in the basement of the library at my school and college, just flipping through Black Panther newspapers.
Oh my goodness.
Uh,
That sounds like the best way to spend your time.
yeah. And it's really weird because now my job looks really different. Like the job that I have now, which is my first official archivist position, um, I am not working with materials at all. First of all, because we're working remotely, and second of all, because the organization I work for, the Black Metropolis Resource Consortium, is not a place where we actually collect materials, where like a group of institutions that we sort of are the network of institutions that do collect materials. But like in our offices, we don't have any historical materials besides our own records. Um, and my job isn't necessarily the archiving part. Like I said, I'm a community engagement archivist. So I'm more chatting with folks, figuring out what they need, hosting workshops about archiving. Um, I'm doing a lot of work with the people who are in the network to make sure that they understand how to engage communities, um, and not just, I think a lot of archivists make the mistake of going out into communities and asking for community stuff and being like, hey, we see you have this collection of photos from your community, you should give that to us because we're a museum. And I don't really vibe with that. I don't think that's the like, I have my own archival collection of photos, and if somebody came to my house and was like, hey, I want that in my museum, I would be like, what are you talking about? Like, you have no right to just take my stuff. And so I'm sort of working through having those discussions of like, okay, well, if we do want to collect materials so that we can document Black history, how do we do it respectfully? And how do we work with communities so that instead of us keeping everything, they have the resources that they need to archive their own stuff and keep it in their home, in their organization, in their church, you know, whatever it is.
Well, with a lot of like white, for example, white art museums, there's families that own archives, own art, and they lend it to they lend it to
Mhm.
museums. They don't just, they just don't hand them over. So it's interesting
Exactly.
that the interaction with the Black community is like you don't have the assumption is that they don't have the knowledge. We don't have the knowledge to
Right.
know how to handle our own archives. So therefore, it must be
Right.
handed over to the institution. That's strange.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think something else that I'm trying to really work on is making sure that people have the resources that they need to archive their own stuff so that in the end, because a big part of the reasoning behind why Black communities and Black families do end up donating collections is because typically a loved one has passed away and they left boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff, and it's impossible to get through, and they don't know how to catalog it. And so usually if they have the capacity to, a museum or a library or an archives will work with them and hire an archivist for them and work through going through all of the materials that are in the collection, deciding what the family wants to keep, deciding what they want to let go of, deciding if they want all of it to be at that museum or library or if they want it to be somewhere else, having all of those discussions. And that's all fits under the category of like donors' rights. Um, but that's something that I feel like I'm still learning a lot about. A lot of my experience with archiving has to do with cataloging and metadata, which is not super fun. Definitely not as fun as actually going out and talking to people, but it's the part where you get to like look through all of the materials. So
This is my last question in this realm. I did not anticipate being asking you so much about this, but I think this is cool. I mean, I don't get to meet an archivist every day of my life, so I'm
yeah.
proud as much as possible. If we were to archive our own lives, right, like Black folks, Black queer folks, we're thinking about, hey, I want to leave something so that people in the future can look and see,
Mhm.
you know, what it is we were about. What is the best place or the best perspective to start an archive for one's own self?
Well, honestly, I was just talking about this. I feel like my when I think about the most sacred forms of archiving to me and like my community, I think about storytelling and like oral histories. I think, and doing like interviews like these, I feel like a lot of the times archivists or archives in general focus on like
Material.
yeah, like papers and photos and things like that. And also focus a lot on documented oral histories. And I think that there is something to the stories that are passed down in families and also chosen families, especially like trans and queer people. I feel like I feel like something I struggle with a lot as a researcher in archives is finding queer and trans people in the archives.
Mm,
Um, Mostly because there has not been much cataloging that is conscious of queer and trans people.
mm,
So it's very difficult, like for example, like are you gonna like there's like a little discussion around like, is the Library of Congress going to put the word dyke in their search catalog categories? um and it's like, well, maybe they should. uh, Maybe that's something that should be considered if we're going to be archiving this. But I think that for me, I think memory keeping in general is a practice that is more important to me than, like, yes, photo documents and everything matter, but I think there's something to at sitting on the floor together or sitting on the ground together or wherever we are and just telling each other stories. And I think especially because, a lot of queer and trans Black people don't live very long,
mm,
because it's a very violent world. And so like I feel like I have very few queer and trans Black elders that
mm.
can tell me those stories. And I think it's important that we start to tell each other those stories, because if we just start that storytelling practice, then some of us will survive.
Yeah.
We do survive every day. And I think that's what I wish people would like pass down. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's get it rolling a little bit. Thank you for all that information. I think it's very useful to people who are listening to this episode, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
What are your pronouns?
My pronouns are he, they. I recently just started going by he, they. I used to just go by they, them, but I decided recently that I wanted to experiment a little bit with using he and they.
Okay. So what is your gender expression? And if you feel comfortable, tell me how you sexually identify.
Yeah, so this was actually when you sent me the list of questions, I saw this question and I was kind of like, damn, this is gonna be like I had to sit and like think about it, because I feel like I haven't been asked like what is your gender expression like in a really long time, and it's changed a lot since the last time I was asked that. I feel like the last time I was asked that was when I first came out as non-binary. So I identify as non-binary, but I feel like before I was still identified very, very heavily with my femininity. And I still do, but like, especially like appearance wise, but I think honestly, a lot of the reason why I still appear very feminine is for safety and like passing reasons. Um, and I think more recently, as I've like settled into myself, I've realized that like internally, no matter how externally I present myself, like I'm actually very masculine, and I identify more with my masculinity than I do my inner femininity. Um, but I still definitely identify with like the experiences of girlhood and womanhood, as somebody who identified as a girl and identified as a woman for part of my life.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah. And then sexually, I struggled a lot with like bouncing between pansexual and bisexual, because like that whole discussion around like the binary and like, can you be bisexual and like non-binary people, like yes, no, I don't know. It's just like so weird. Like I like people of all genders. Like it that like I've never met somebody of a gender and been like, oh, I could never see myself like being engaging with you in like a romantic or sexual way. Like that's never happened to me. Like because of their gender. And then I also I don't identify as monogamous. All of my relationships are not monogamous.
So they're poly or not?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I feel like some people would consider the term poly to mean that like I feel like I've just heard people define poly as different things at different times, and I can't keep up, and I'm like, I don't know. So it's just like
yes.
I love multiple people always. Like that's just I can't. I feel like for a long time I was like lying to myself and telling myself that only one person was for me and like all of this stuff, and then I quickly realized that that was just very not true, and that I love multiple people all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, I think some people find comfort in language, and some people are like language fails to
Yeah.
describe what it is I'm experiencing. So
Yeah.
I think that's a perfectly great answer.
Yeah. I also like heard somebody in, I think it was a thread or a chat, I can't remember what it was, but somebody was talking about how being Black and queer specifically sometimes, especially for people who identify heavily with their Africanness, um, it is harder sometimes to identify with terms like bisexual and pansexual and non-binary, that don't come from us a lot of the time. Like I don't know. I don't really I
So like Black American or Black diasporically.
like diasporic.
Okay.
Um, and like the person was making the argument that the terms bisexual and non-binary and all of these words were like white terms that were given to us to describe ourselves,
That's the
and
second.
that
Yeah.
yeah, and that maybe it was time that Black people come up with terms for ourselves.
I like that idea. I like
Yeah.
um where do you find home?
Um, I honestly feel like for a lot of my life, I found home in my relationships with other people. And not just like romantic relationships, but like familiar relationships, like friendships and things like that. But I think that was because I have a very complicated relationship to land. Like, it feels wrong to claim the land of Chicago as my own because I'm not Indigenous. It feels wrong to claim Africa as home because I'm like generationally so far removed from that continent. Um, my mom is Mexican, but I'm not from Mexico, and so I feel kind of removed from Mexico in that way. Also because like Mexico is also indigenous. It's just like so complicated,
Yeah.
and I felt like for a long time I was like, is Chicago home? Is Mexico home? Like, where is home? Where am I looking? And then I was just like, I feel honestly, I realized when I grew into my spirituality how connected I felt to water and to being with other people that I love in water. Um, and like bodies of water, yes, but even like taking a bath with somebody is something that's very like sacred to me.
Mm.
Um, but it's interesting because I don't know how to swim. So
Sorry.
so like oh, like there's like I remember when I studied abroad in Guanajuato in Mexico for a semester my sophomore year of college.
One of my questions, have you been to Mexico? What was that like?
Yeah, so I actually, my mom is from Mexico City, and uh, my family visited Mexico pretty frequently when I was little. But then the recession hit, and then we sort of stopped going. Um, and then in high school, I went to Guanajuato on a school trip that my school paid for. Um, and then when I was in college, I was looking for a study abroad program, and there's a program in the same place in Guanajuato that I had been in high school. So I decided to go there. I was there for 5 months. Um, it was honestly a really, really transformative time in my life. Right before I went, I was having one of the worst like mental episodes, like episodes of my mental illness that I had ever had. And that was one of the main reasons why I decided to leave, actually, was because I knew that I needed to get away from the college that I was at, which was like really intense and like just had such extreme expectations of its students.
Mm.
I didn't want to be home because I have a lot of like traumatic memories here, and I was just like, I don't want to be here either.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't know where else to go, and I was like, well, I want to go somewhere that's not in the U.S., but I don't. The only language I speak is Spanish, and I feel kind of weird about going other places. Like, I don't know. I just like felt so, I don't know. And then I was looking at the programs in Latin America, and there was this one program in Guanajuato where I had been before. And I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Um, and I lived there, and it was really healing. I feel like I learned a lot about myself there because I wasn't so focused on school anymore. Like, I was still in school, but school was not as difficult at all. Um, and life was just like not easier, but just like slower. Like,
Mhm.
people were not rushing all of the time to do things. I also, one of my great grandfathers is from Guanajuato, actually. So I had some like ancestral messages and like dreams that were coming to me while I was there that were really scary at first, but then I realized that it was probably just my people talking to me. Um,
Probably
and
good.
then, yeah, yeah. And then the reason I brought up being in Mexico is because I went to Playa del Carmen, and like touched those waters for the first time since I was like a small child. Um, and it was like, it was a very magical moment. I felt, I remember just like standing alone in the water. And my friends being really worried about me because they knew I didn't know how to swim, but I had asked them to sort of just leave me alone in the water for a little bit. Um, and I was just standing there, and it was this moment where I was just like, this is what I've been looking for. And I feel like after I went there, I started reading a lot about like a lot more about the transatlantic slave trade. Like, I did a lot of research about the trade specifically that went into Mexico through Veracruz,
Mhm.
um, and studied a lot of Afro-Mexican history. And then from there, just started studying a lot of different connections between Black people and Mexican people, both within Mexico and in the US. Yeah.
I did I did a small interview with my brother, and we talked about how when we went to Mexico, we dealt with a lot of racism from our Mexican
Mhm.
family. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that was your experience growing up.
Yeah.
But when we went there, your whole life people tell you, black people don't exist in Mexico, black people don't exist in Mexico, you don't belong there. And then you go and you see all these black people just everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
That really, um that I would say was an eye-opening experience when going there. I'm really interested though in your spiritual, you mentioned that in your open call, in the open call,
Mhm.
um about your spiritual attunement. Was it Mexico that opened you up to practicing? I think you said hoodoo. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or was this something that was always like within you? Um,
Well, it's really complicated because I feel like, well, first of all, like religiously, originally my most of the Mexican side of my family are Jehovah's Witnesses,
wow.
um, and are very like devout Jehovah's Witnesses. And my mom, my sister, and I were with that denomination until I was about 5 or 6 years old. Um, and then we, as a family, identified as Christian for a while. But really, what it was my sister started getting into like astrology and tarot,
Mhm.
and started doing things like started buying me crystals, started telling me to light candles. You know, she put up her ancestor altar, and that was around the time when I was really struggling with my mental health. And so I decided to do the same thing. I didn't know that it was called an ancestor altar. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just knew that I had a photo of my granny and a candle and a cup of water and like some incense. Um, and then I got to Mexico and set up a little altar there. But I never really, I mean, the like non Christian spiritual practices of Mexico, like curanderismo, is something that I feel really complicated learning about, because a lot of the people who are practicing curanderismo are white Mexicans who are appropriating indigenous culture. And I'm over it. And like all of the books that I've tried to read, like I look up the people and they're just white Mexicans. And I'm like, this is not what I want. And so I feel like after, like I'm looking at my altar right now and I literally have a like a, I don't know what it's called, like a panel of the Virgen de Guadalupe.
Mhm.
Uh, but I'm not Catholic. I've never been Catholic. I have rosaries on my altar. I've never been Catholic, but I feel like,
The saints are translations of the orishas of other African gods and goddesses that that are much older than Catholicism.
right, exactly. And so I feel like being in Mexico opened me up spiritually in the sense that I had a lot of distractions removed. But
Mm.
then when I got back to the States, I decided to do research on spiritual traditions, mostly to heal myself because I was in drastic need of some healing. I discovered hoodoo and realized that a lot of the things I had already been doing or my family had already been doing, which I feel like is very often the case with like hoodoo, is that people find the term hoodoo and then they're like, oh yeah, my granny taught me how to do that, or like my auntie taught me how to do that or something. Um, and so yeah, that's sort of how I came into that. I feel like, I mean, I definitely still venerate my Mexican ancestors. Um, but I feel like a lot of my practices do draw strongly from hoodoo. Um, I don't know enough about curanderismo, I feel like.
I've had a similar reaction every time I read about it or explored it. I was just it just never felt right. Like it
Yeah.
just usually when you run into a spiritual practice or knowledge or just wisdom or even a dream, it feels like there's a key that gets unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
It's innate in you, and yeah, I felt the same way. But
Yeah.
I appreciate cuenderos, uh I'm always open to learning, but I feel what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. And it was something that I feel like I was never really allowed to explore when I was younger. And I definitely am not allowed to explore it with my Mexican family because they're like, that's the devil and we cannot. Like my I don't think anybody in my Mexican family knows that my sister reads tarot cards.
Mm.
Uh, there was a point in which my abuelita was possibly going to move into my apartment in the extra bedroom. And I like went to my mom and I was like, what are we going to do when she sees my altar? Like, what? So I think that's part of the reason why I identify. I also feel like I just feel very complicated about my Mexican identity as a Black person who has also, like you said, experienced a lot of racism from my Mexican family. Um, we are definitely like the least favorites of the family on that.
Me, my brother, and my sister. The least, it was like the bottom of the totem pole. Here they come.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like my other Mexican cousins are like all doctors, and it's like whatever. Like,
You're an archivist. That's so cool.
yeah, I'm like, I can do cool things too.
Holy shit. What are you searching for?
I honestly, on this thread of like spirituality, I feel like I'm just looking for divinity. I feel like my whole life, I used to, when I was a teenager and I was very lost and very mentally ill, I was using substances really heavily. And I felt like I was doing it because I was looking for something greater than me. I was looking for an experience that would take me out of myself in a way and show me something that wasn't the chaos that was going on in my head. And then as I got older, I realized that all I was really looking for was like a sense of God, and not like God as in like one male Christian God, but as in like spirit, as in like creator, as in like that entity that makes everything living. And I feel like for a long time I was looking for it outside of myself. And, like when I was in the Atlantic, I was like, oh, it's here. And when I am like in the woods, I'm like, oh, it's here. I'm like, yeah. It's spirit is there for sure. But also like spirit is, I feel like I realized very recently that spirit is with me also. And that I can tap into that whenever I want. And I think that's something that's been very powerful. Like I had a really powerful meditation a couple of months ago that I hadn't meditated in months. And then I meditated for the first time and had this like very seamless 40-minute meditation that felt very easy and had very clear messages. And I was like, wow, I can tap into that literally whenever I want. Like I have like that's within me and I can just close my eyes and breathe a little bit and get access to it. And so in some ways I feel like I'm not really searching anymore. Um, I feel like if I'm searching for anything, it's just a deeper understanding of that. Yeah.
Nice. Um, where do you see yourself? And this could be in a book, in an archive, in music, anywhere.
Um, when I first saw this question, I was like, I don't know. I was like trying to think because I definitely like when I identified still as a cis woman, I feel like I identified and I still do identify heavily with Nina Simone.
Mhm.
Um, Nina Simone has or had bipolar disorder, which I also have. And so, and her music, like I started listening to her when I was in high school, and I heard her version of Strange Fruit, um, and then started listening to her more in over my gap year. I took a gap year between high school and college, and then was listening to her more and more throughout the years. And then I did some research on her and realized that she had bipolar disorder. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
LEC, yeah.
Yeah. And then, but then I was trying to think of like where I see myself as like a trans masculine person. Um, and one of my loves actually made me think about this today, that because I was like, I don't know if I don't know, like I couldn't think of like black trans masculine people. And then they were talking about Missy Elliott, and I was like, oh, of course. And
There's a fluidity to Missy that isn't necessarily talked about.
right, but it's like a lot of her songs, like she's talking about getting it in, but she's also like flexing really hard, and I'm like, I was just looking when they reminded me of this. I wrote a paper about some of Missy's. I realized I never finished the paper. I don't know how I passed that class, but I had started about Missy Elliott's music videos, and talked a lot about that, about how she really, I mean, manipulates people's views of her based on like what she wants. And she's like, you're gonna view me as I want you to view me. And that's completely breaks the binary of whatever you think gender can be, or should be. And it's so fucking cool. And I feel like I feel like some music writers are like, oh, you know, Missy like does so much with lyricism and like playing with rhyme and time, and like she does do all of those things, but I'm also like, she's like a gender bending icon, and like people don't talk about that. And I actually, when I was doing research for that paper, I saw this interview where they ask her if she identifies as a lesbian or as bisexual, and she says no, that she identifies as straight. And a lot of people are like, well, she's lying, or she's like ashamed, or like blah blah blah. I'm like, or maybe she's just messing with you all.
Right.
Like it's none of our business anyway to know what her sexuality is. So she shouldn't have to answer that question. So maybe she's just fucking with you. Like, I don't know.
I agree with all of that. Missy subverts the power dynamics between a man and a woman.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just like, okay, who's gonna come out autonomous? But it's never like, I love that you made this point. Because it's never like, oh, I got this pussy, I'm gonna put it in your face. Blah, blah, blah. Like, it's more like, let me spit some game to you, and I'm kind of gonna fuck you up a little bit in the head to be like,
Yeah.
oh, I really want you, but it's all it's all a game of seduction for.
Yeah. Yeah, and like in the essay, I focused on this one, the music video for 1 Minute Man
Mhm.
with Ludacris and Trina. And like Trina is Trina, and like basically like give me head and give it to me good. And then Ludacris the whole time is talking about giving head and giving it good. And Missy throughout the song is like, there's this scene where she's in like a massage parlor with like this man, and he's like all oiled up, and she like takes her head off and then like dances headless for him, but the whole time is, I don't want no minute man. So she's like taunting him and being like, you might not be good enough for me, so I'm just letting you know. But at the same time, with this like visual representation of like literally just her body dancing. And
Yeah.
I'm like, when did this music video come out? Like, like so completely ahead of the game. And I feel like now, because it was like not, I mean, it wasn't too long ago. Like, I obviously still remember it, like grew up listening to Missy, but like, I feel like it was enough years ago that, like, for example, like that I could forget that Missy was somebody that I felt connected to as like a masculine person, until somebody mentioned to me Missy Elliott today, and I was like, oh, that's so true.
I like that. I like the interpretation that read, and I feel like I know it's like an interpretation, but it feels accurate.
Yeah.
um, you mentioned something, and please let me know if this is if it's too much for you. Tell me how long you've had bipolar or been bipolar.
Well, so bipolar disorder is very interesting. It typically, flares up around your 20s,
Mm-hmm.
but can be triggered by different things. And so when I was young, when I was like a child, I was a very anxious child. I was very, I mean, people were just like, oh, Tanya's so sensitive. But I was like, no, I'm literally having like panic attacks.
Mm.
And then when I was like 12 or 13, I started dealing pretty heavily with depression and like suicidal thoughts. And then in high school, when I started using substances really heavily, I feel like that's what triggered a lot of the mania. Bipolar disorder is, it used to be called manic depression, but it's basically a disorder in which you move from states of mania to states of depression at different levels. And it's different. There's different types of bipolar disorder and different types of cycling. Um, but that's the gist of it. And so for most of high school, I was either really depressed or really manic. And in college, it got worse for sure, but I had immediate like walking distance access to a psychiatrist and a counselor. And I had always been in therapy, but I had never had a psychiatrist. And it was actually finding a psychiatrist. The first psychiatrist that I had was not the best one. He was just like an old white man who didn't really care about me or my health and just was like, you're a liability and we need to like sedate you.
Wow.
um, and then I eventually got a couple other psychiatrists. The psychiatrist I'm with now, she's wonderful. She's from China. She focuses on holistic healing. Um, and yeah, and I feel like my journey with bipolar disorder has been so long because for a really long time I was misdiagnosed. I had been diagnosed with just generalized anxiety disorder and depression and clinical depression. Which is not the same thing as bipolar disorder, because actually, if you have bipolar disorder and you're put on antidepressants that are for clinical depression, it triggers a manic episode.
Wow.
Um, and so for a long time, I was on antidepressants and was not depressed, but I was just manic. Um, and it wasn't until I got to college and the psychiatrist was like, whoa, 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 like we got to actually figure out what your diagnosis is and what medication is right for you. And it took me like 2 to 3 years to find a combination of medication that worked for me. And even then, a lot of the times, dealing with bipolar disorder is like really like it's just sort of management, like crisis management. Like I would like start having a manic episode and they would be like, okay, which sedative are we gonna put Tanya on now? And it wasn't until I graduated college and was like out of the pressures that I decided I wanted to slowly start going off my medication.
Mhm.
Um, and so I'm in the process of that now. It's really hard, I'm not gonna lie. I've been medicated since I was 16 years old. So my body is like, what's going on? Like, but I feel like it's something like I've always been very vocal about my mental health issues. Um, I think it's something that in my family, I mean, mental health issues run in my family, and my family has never shied away from talking about them, which is something that I feel like is really rare for people in my community, especially like coming, like my mom is an immigrant from Mexico and my dad is a Black man who grew up in the projects in Chicago. So it's like, I'm very grateful to them for like, because the fact that like when they first started noticing that something was wrong, they immediately sent me to therapy. Um, and I was like 14. And
And
the fact that
they had the resources.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The fact that we had insurance, that the insurance covered therapy, and that I was able to do that was like, I'm so grateful to that because by the time I got to college, like I knew to go to the counseling center. I knew to get medication. I knew how to ask for help. And now that I'm out of college, like I know how to look for a psychiatrist in my city. I know how to find a therapist. Like I know how to do these things. Um, but it's taken a decade to get here, you know? And I think that's something, you know, I feel like a lot of people will be like, wow, Tanya, like you've come so far. And I'm like, yeah, but I've been in therapy for 10 years. Like that's a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
It's a long time. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of medication, a lot of healing. And even now, I mean, like I still struggle a lot. Like I have weeks where I don't sleep for most nights, and then I'm just like up all night, and then I sleep throughout the day, and then the next week I sleep like 18 hours every night. Like it it definitely affects the way I live my life, but I feel like I'm more in control now because I'm more aware of the patterns and the cycles, and I can notice them, and I can avoid doing certain things that I didn't know to avoid before. So yeah.
I appreciate you for expressing that. I feel like when it comes to Black and queerness and mental health, people seem to think that they're like these separate entities that can't intersect with
Yeah.
each other. So I appreciate you. Also,
Yeah.
I just want to let you know I've had from season one, Erica Kane also has bipolar disorder. She
Oh
talked about,
wow. Yeah.
yeah, she talked about that. And in season three, which just came out today, actually, I talked with Jack Appleby, who has dissociative identity disorder, which means they have
Mm,
like different identities that are expressed as a result of the trauma
mm-hmm.
experience. So I thank you. I think people need to
Yeah.
know about mental health or have an awareness
Yeah.
of what that means to folks.
Yeah. And it's something that I I think about mania and being Black and being trans all of the time, and just how and all even if I didn't have bipolar disorder, I would still probably be labeled as insane by some institution because I am trans or because I'm Black, because I am other. There's actually, I mean, there's a long, long history of like psych psychiatric history of scientists. For example, I forget when, but at some point in history during the slave trade, or during actual slavery in the Americas, there was a white scientist who came up with a disease that he said caused Black people to run away, and that it was actually a mental disorder that
Mm.
they needed to be cured from, and that you could bring them to him, and that he would cure them from running away from you. Um, and then, of course, there's the history of people who come out as trans to a therapist or a psychiatrist and are hospitalized because they're seen as legally insane. Um, and so I think about that all the time, and it's just I feel like even especially when I was still identifying as a Black girl or as a Black woman, and I would have episodes or I would have anxiety attacks, people would just be like, "Oh, that bitch crazy," and I'm like that I that to me is something that really gets to me when people are just oh, that person is just crazy, or especially when I see Black disabled people who get shot by police. I'm I honestly think about what if I had an episode in public and that would happen to me. I had an episode in high school, actually, in the hallways,
Mm.
and I was conscious enough that I knew to go to my dean's office, but my dean knew not to call security on me. And my dean took me to the counselor. But I think the only reason I had this was because I went to a private white high school that I was on a full scholarship for.
Yeah.
And so they had more of an understanding. They had a counselor, not all schools don't even have counselors.
You don't have, yep.
So I went to the counselor and said, but I when I got older, I was damn, what if they had called 911? Because what do? They send an ambulance, yeah, but they also send the cops.
Yeah.
um and I've had to have had conversations with my family where I'm if something happens to me, do not call 911. Like, that's not who you should be calling. Like, you should be calling my psychiatrist or my therapist. Like, that's who I want you to call. But that's something that people don't think about. And then it becomes very difficult because, you know, like if somebody is having suicidal ideation and you're worried about them, like, what do? People usually call the cops to do a check-in. But, you know, we know how that ends up. So I think I'm trying to figure out for myself and also for my community, like what it looks like for like mentally disabled people to get help in crisis situations.
Most definitely. Most definitely. When do you feel safe?
I feel safe when I'm with other trans people, when I'm with other Black trans people, not just any trans people, Black trans people specifically. I think there's something about that shared experience of like, or even just like, you know, I feel safe whenever I'm in a space where I'm not getting misgendered constantly. And like where people actually use the pronouns that I want them to use. I've had therapy sessions where a therapist will misgender me and it just like shatters the whole moment. And I'm like, this whole therapy session just like went to waste because you just misgendered me and like invalidated everything. But it's like, and like I'm not out to my family. And so like I a lot of the times will like, I mean they don't notice, but like my mom will call me Mija, you know, which is like so casual. And I like wince a little bit. And I'm just like, ugh. But it's like I'm not out to them, so I can't like say anything to them. But it's definitely like when other people misgender me, like when maybe not my coworkers, because I still struggle correcting my coworkers when they misgender me, but like when people who are like my age, like in like especially like white people, like especially like cis white women misgender me.
That's the most, yes.
I'm like, you have no right. That is not, those are not my pronouns. I'm like very vocal about it. And I'm like, no, you cannot call me that.
Get it right.
Like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's and then I'm like, maybe you should just leave and come back when you learn to gender me correctly. But it's like that's something so small, and it's like I only stopped going by she her pronouns so recently that it's like I'm still in the process of like getting everybody in my life to call me by the pronouns that I want. Like I said at the beginning, like I just went from they them to he they. So it's always changing, but I know I definitely do not feel safe when like people who I don't know or people who do know that I identify as non-binary still refer to me as a woman or with she her pronouns, because I'm like, your conception of me is completely false.
Yeah.
Like you think of me as something that I am genuinely not. And I think that's why I haven't come out as trans. I mean, my family knows that I'm queer, but they don't know that I'm trans. And I think that part of the reason why that is because I don't have the capacity to sit down with them and explain to them my whole gender identity, because I don't even know what it is yet. Like I'm very young. I spent more than 90% of my life identifying as a cis woman. So like I'm still trying to figure it all out. Yeah.
Do you dream of a moment where that will happen? Or are you just like, you know what, I'm gonna take my time with this?
I do think it will happen. I imagine it'll probably happen sometime soon. I think I'm slowly preparing my family for that moment by for example, one of my partners is non-binary, and I've been going through the process with my parents of using the right pronouns for them, especially with my mom, and just like with Spanish and pronouns, because it is so like
So ingrained.
oh, it is so like and it's just like it's not like it's so ingrained. And I want to say it's not that hard, but like, I guess it is. I don't really know. But like, I'm just trying to walk into it. And I think that as I'm doing that, I'm slowly becoming more comfortable with the idea of coming out to them as trans.
We're going to pivot a little bit. Tell me about the first time you realized you were Black.
I've been asked this question before, and I always have the same answer because I honestly felt like there was not a moment in which I realized. I feel like because I have one non-Black parent and one Black parent, I was always aware that there was a difference between the two of them. Especially because of the language, the fact that my mom speaks English, but with us, she only speaks Spanish because that's her native tongue and it's most comfortable to her. So like my mom spoke Spanish and is very light skinned, and my dad is light skinned but is still Black and speaks English. And so I was always really aware of that difference. And I feel like because of that, and I feel like because I was aware that my dad was Black and I was aware that my sister was Black, and I was like, well, then, I mean, that means that I'm Black too, because that's what we all are. And I feel like that maybe came from the fact that I spent a lot of time when I was a kid with my mom. And I'm not like that much darker than my mom, but I'm definitely darker than my mom. And so that's something that I was always aware of. I think maybe I realized, and I'm just not conscious of it, but I think if there was a moment that I realized, it was probably with my Mexican family. Just having them call you like morenita and stuff like that, and whatever. Like they always call, my sister has kinkier hair than I do, and they always call her chinita, and like all of these things. But yeah, I feel like there was never, like, I don't have a memory of like one specific moment where I was like, yes, like this is what that means. Yeah. And I think that I'm very privileged in that I haven't had that moment in a negative context, and I think that's because I'm light skinned. So it's like yeah.
I feel you. There's some folks who are like, I've never not been Black. So I think I think that's cool. Any answer is the right answer. Yeah, never not been Black. I appreciate that. Let's go back to another memory. Tell me about the first time you realized you were queer.
This is a really funny question because when I was a kid, like I always knew that I was attracted to people who were not men. Because I always had crushes on my friends, and most of my friends were girls. But honestly, like I thought that was true for everybody. I thought everybody had crushes on their friends. I thought
yes.
I feel like that's why I didn't realize for the longest time, because I was just like, no, this is like true for everybody. And then like I knew that there were people who were homosexual and that were only attracted to like their same gender. But I was like, well, it's natural, like I just want to kiss everybody. Like that's just like kissing is just so fun. Like we should just all just kiss each other. And then in high school, I was like experimenting sexually with like different people. And then I got to college, and actually my best friend, when we first met, like one of the first days we hung out, we were hanging out in a big group together, and I had been talking about a girl that I had kissed in high school. And my friend, they turned around and they were like, "Are you bisexual too?" And I stopped for a moment and I was like, yeah, I guess that's what that means. I have never thought about it, but yeah, that's what that means. And I was like, wow, like, I guess I'm queer. Like, I guess that's what that means. But it's like, it was weird. It's interesting, or I guess not weird. I guess it's just interesting that like it took that moment of somebody directly asking me, like, are you bisexual? For me to be like, oh yeah, that's what that is.
I
Yeah.
my hope is that it actually is like that in the future, or just
Yeah.
small populations currently. Like, yeah, I just like to kiss everybody.
Yeah.
It should be our spirit at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, and I feel like I definitely knew that there was something taboo about it because like most of my attractions to people that I pursue, like most of my attractions to people were always feminine people,
Mhm.
but I always pursued my attractions to masculine people because I think subconsciously I was like, this is what society wants from me, and this is what people expect of me, and so this is what I should do. And then I got to college and I met lots of other openly queer people. I'm sure I knew queer people before, but we weren't all openly queer. Um, and so I met a lot of openly queer people. A friend of mine came out as trans my first year, and that sort of was what shifted everything. And I was like, oh, there are people who are not a man and not a woman, and there are people who don't choose labels, and there are people who just like fucking, It's like
Yeah,
weird, like
out here.
yeah.
If you can go back to your 12-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I think, and this is like something that I think a lot of, there's like a very typical answer, but honestly, it's really true that I think I needed to hear was that it really would get better.
Mm.
Um, I think when I was 12 in particular, that was one of the lowest moments of my life. I really felt like I was completely alone. I felt like I was experiencing feelings that nobody had experienced before. Um, and I think that I would have told myself to talk to my friends more because I grew up and like reconnected with one of my friends from middle school, and she was like, "Oh yeah, no, like me and so, like the two of us were dating." Like two of my friends in our friend group, she was like, we were dating, and I was like, "Why didn't anybody tell me this? Like, if I had known that you guys were queer,
Yeah.
then maybe I would have known that I was queer, and I wouldn't have been so confused about why I wanted to kiss all my girlfriends. Like, I don't know." But um, I think that I just would have tried to reassure myself that it would all like that the feelings wouldn't go away, but that I would eventually learn to deal with them and that they wouldn't be so controlling of my whole life anymore.
Mm. What do you want to hear from your 60-year-old self?
I honestly just want to know like if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now. I feel like a lot of the times still like even though I feel pretty sure that like I'm on the path that I'm supposed to be on,
Mhm.
I always wonder if there's something that I'm missing or if there's something that I should know about right now that I should be preparing for or something. But I also would want to ask myself just like what our relationship with ourself is. I think that it's really like it's getting a lot better now than it ever has been before, and I'm really excited to see like as I live with myself as an adult. Like I just moved into my first apartment like on my own. Uh,
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so as I'm like spending all of this time with myself, I'm like, ooh, like what do I like to do? Like I baked cookies the other day, and I was like, I've never baked cookies from scratch before. Like I don't know. It was like the first time that I was like, oh, I just want to bake something. And I was like, I can do that because I have an oven and I have ingredients and I have, like I have all the things. And I think that I'm just really excited to explore that more. Um, and I want to know what that time is like as like a 60-year-old. Like, whoa.
That sounds fun. I'm looking forward to hearing about that in 30 plus years. That sounds dope.
Yeah.
How do you experience love?
I think I experienced love through like really deep intimacy. I think I think that a lot of people categorize Aquarians as detached, but really we value our relationships more than anything else. And I think that I, in particular, identify with that because when I am with other people in intimate spaces, um, and like not just sexually intimate, but just like, you know, intimate, like
Mhm.
sharing feelings or like sharing food or like sharing stories or anything like that. I think those are moments where I feel really full. Um, and those are the moments that I crave the most. Like this pandemic has been really hard because all I ever want to do is like spend time with my loved ones and like my family and my chosen family.
Mhm.
Um, and not being able to do that has made me feel not lonely, but just like I miss it, you know? Like I miss cooking for people. Like I used to cook for people all the time in college. Like I miss cooking for people. I would just want to feed somebody, but it's not safe to do that anymore. So
Yeah.
now, yeah, so now like I experience love when my family lives upstairs, and so you know, when I spend time with them, I really feel love, especially with my nephew. I feel like when I like FaceTime with my chosen family, those are really special moments to me. Because before, like with my best friend in Chicago, we lived like 10 minutes away from each other, and like before, we would just like bike to the lake whenever we wanted. Um, and now it's like we can't do that, and like over the summer we would still hang out, but you couldn't really go to the lake because there's like a lot of people there and you can't really spread out. It's just like so but I think I definitely experienced love through like spending time with people, um and sharing that time and space for sure.
Yeah. I second that. As an Aquarius moon, I second. It's not that we're detached, we just like to spend our time with very specific people, like
Exactly.
who we really love. Because it's, you know, all the hoopla of the social environments and events, like it could be fun, but it's also very draining.
It is really draining, and like I think I don't know, like my sister's a Libra and has so many friends, and I'm like,
The
how
Libras are like that though, because they're like the hoes of the zodiac. They get along with everybody. It's like,
I
okay.
know. And it's like people always come for me because they're like, oh, you just like get involved with people and then you just dip. And it's like, I stay involved with the people that I meant to stay involved with. And like the people that do not serve me, like, why? I don't need to keep them around for that long. Like, it's really not that necessary.
Same. Ooh, I have two more questions. If you could change your identity, would you? And I've expanded this question to form. So if my answer is usually a hummingbird or a sequoia tree.
Mm,
You could be a star in the most random of galaxies, just anything.
mm. I think I don't think I would change, like, if I were to remain human, I don't think I would change my identity. And I think that even when I was like a young Black girl who was trying to fit into like white beauty stereotypes, I would have said the same thing. I think that despite the danger that comes with all of my identities, I can't imagine being anything else. Um, and I don't want to be anything else. I don't want to be cis. Like I like something that I was thinking about was like, well, would I choose, like if I was given the choice of choosing a gender, would I choose to be born a man? Um,
Question.
and I don't think I would. I don't think I want to be a cis man, to be honest. I know a lot of cis men. We don't get along a lot of the time.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I think if I were to change form, I would probably be a body of water.
okay. Do
Yeah.
you have a specific body, a lake, a river, the entire
Well, I
ocean?
feel really connected to Lake Michigan because that's the body of water I've spent the most time at in my life. But you know, being African American, I feel like the Atlantic is also really, it's the spot, you know?
That's powerful.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. Last question. Is there anything that I did not touch upon that you really want to express in this moment?
Um, I just really like the title of these interviews, Black, Queer, and Alive. I think that a lot of, especially with like social media and like activism now, people like post so many pictures of like dead Black, queer, and trans people, and they're like, oh, RIP, like send money to their family, like blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you could send us money now so that we don't die.
Point made.
And then you wouldn't have to send money to our families. You could just send it to us. And it's
Mhm.
like, I think it's growing more as mutual aid becomes more popular. Um, but I think the focus on Black queer people while we're alive, like I don't I'll be remembered by the people in my family and like my descendants after I die. I don't need to be remembered by like everybody after I die. Like I don't need to be a news story. Like if you want to appreciate me while I'm alive.
I call it hashtag saints.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because we're here and we're breathing.
Exactly.
Ac-
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop our recording right here.
Okay.